Video game prototypes and demos can differ so much from the final product. From mild differences to huge differences, they really show how the game shaped into what it was meant to be. Different character designs, different soundtracks, different looking versions of levels we know so well, and even completely unknown levels that were never used in the final games. Today we'll be looking at 6 prototypes and demos from the PS1 that were extremely intriguing to me. Let's press start. Let's start off with Spyro 1's prototypes. The instance of a Spyro prototype gameplay was posted by YouTuber lmao back in 2012 and contained a good amount of differences, such as different sounding voice recordings and lines, different enemy noises, as well as different names for levels. An example being Alpine Ridge being called Alpine Cliffs in this version. The Supercharge was also called Super Dash in this version, which honestly sounds off, hearing the characters say Super Dash instead of Supercharge. This is a good change because Supercharge just sounds better.
When you see arrows like these, you can charge along with them to begin a Super Dash.
Super Dash! Excellent!
Go ahead, try it.
When you get farther into the prototype, you start to see more signs of it being unfinished, such as the dragons just straight up starting to only speak in text, then eventually whenever you just step on their platforms, they disappear. Now, the August 1998 prototype was never released online for others to play, as lmao stated they didn't want to get into legal trouble, which is completely understandable. Eventually, years later, YouTuber HWD405 would release the June 15th, 1998 prototype, and it would have some pretty interesting differences, such as in the blowhard level. You would blow off the hats of the wizards and then you could defeat them, which is honestly a very cool gimmick that they should have kept in, honestly. It would have made the boss a bit more interesting, though in my opinion the bosses in Spyro 1 are definitely not the game's strong suit anyway, so... Magic Crafters also had a random empty room. I do wonder if this room was going to be used for Blowhard's portal, kind of like later on in the prototype, how Metalhead's portal was originally up the stairs on the structure next to the hot air balloon. Though the portal is glitched and you have to be in a certain place to see the boss letters, you're also unable to enter it. They should have kept it because it's so epic for a boss level entrance, honestly. The fairies in the flight levels and haunted towers also had creepy ass faces in this version. Like, I'm not even exaggerating, they're terrifying to me. And the last world in the game, Nasty's World, called Machinist's World in this build, is actually just the level Nork Cove. And something interesting here is that there's a random crate floating in the water that definitely isn't there in the final version, and when you jump on it, it starts moving towards another part of the level. However, this crate is very much not programmed all the way, and you have to be constantly moving while you're on it or else you'll fall off. The funniest difference here is that the underwear Norks have no hearts on their underwear, just plain boring white underwear. Oh, the horror. The portal to Twilight Harbor is ominously called the End in this build, and you're unable to access it by normal gameplay means. You have to use a cheat code to get into that level as well as Nasty Nork's level. The Nasty Nork level is the most unfinished thing in the prototype. Just a skybox, untextured floors, and an early design of Nasty Nork. He can't actually do any damage to you. Nothing happens when he shoots at you with his scepter because it wasn't programmed in yet. He doesn't make any noises and also doesn't run away from Spyro like a wuss like he did in the final version. He just sits there taunting you. Moving on to the Spyro 2 prototype, we have the August 1999 prototype. This prototype originated from Project Deluge, which you should definitely support. They're very dedicated to finding and archiving video game prototypes, and eventually was released via a previewable disc. The music is also a bit different. Sunny Beach and Skelos Badlands use slightly different versions of their usual music, while Crystal Glacier has a different theme altogether. The most major difference is Allura the Fawn narrating over the cutscenes. I honestly do not get why this was removed.
workers of Idle Springs are famous throughout Avalar for the statues they carve. But now, some of these statues have been coming to life, scaring the workers and stealing their food. As always, the workers are trying to make the best of things, but usually a statue is just a statue.
It honestly gives so much depth into the population of Avalar. She even mentions the NPC fawns in Fracture Hills being her cousins? Something we wouldn't have known had the prototype never released. The homeworld levels were also called Summer Castle, Autumn Castle, and Winter Castle respectively. The cutscenes also had no background music, and particularly in the first cutscene of the game with Spyro running across the Dragon Realm, he seems to be standing in front of some sort of stone exterior? A cliff, maybe? I don't know what it is, but it's not there in the final version of the cutscene. He also remarks about the rain, just like in the final version, but yet in this version of the cutscene it's not even raining. I think Spyro needs his eyes checked. Sparks is also a weird gray color for some reason.
Is this rain ever gonna stop? I've forgotten what the sun looks like.
As for Spyro 3, the most interesting and earliest prototype we have is the April 2000 build, which is very janky and only has a few levels available. It also reuses Spyro 2's title screen, but with Spooky Swamp's music playing over it. This song is heard way too much in this prototype, definitely due to the soundtrack not being fully finished yet. There's also early level names. Icy Peak was called Iceberg, Bamboo Terrace was called Rice Paddies, Cloud Spires was called Cloud City, Spooky Swamp was Swamp Party, and the level Frozen Altars was named Aztec Arctica in this build, which is honestly a really sick name they could have kept in. There's also hidden caves in the Molten Crater level, with one being inaccessible because of being too high up, and another containing a metal chest with no way to break it open. In this prototype, there were also cut tiger enemies in Bamboo Terrace, which are very clearly janky with their turning animations. Something I found pretty interesting is that there were Rhinoc thieves instead of the regular thieves that originated from Spyro 1 and made a comeback in 3. The eggs were textured differently, having a more reddish appearance to most of them. Some of them were also green with a scaly looking texture on them. This prototype also has some interesting lines from the characters or developers. It contains such gems such as piss off, pay me fat ducats, or the chick dies. The critically acclaimed Final Fantasy VII first released on the PlayStation 1 on January 13th, 1997 in Japan and September 7th that same year in the US. It's a very universally loved classic with great characters and gameplay. There's actually a disc that dates back to 1996 that contains quite a few differences. This is not a prototype of the full game, unfortunately, because it's a demo, but it's still very interesting, so I decided to include it. A pretty interesting thing about the prototype version of the opening cutscene is that where it zooms in on the stars, there's actually text there. While in the final game, there's just nothing there. It just zooms in on the stars for quite a while, and it's confusing, but that explains it. In regards to the dialogue, some of the dialogue from the characters are longer, and they also censor cuss words from characters like Barrett. Mako is also referred to as Makro in this build, except for one instance in the dialogue where they say Mako instead. In the prototype's combat scenes, you have Cloud, Barrett, and Aerith, despite the fact that Aerith is supposed to not have joined your team yet during the bombing mission. I assume this was just to show her off in combat. Something interesting is Cloud's limit break abilities basically being switched around, with Braver being able to paralyze enemies and Cross-Slash just doing a lot of damage. The character models that are used outside of combat are also quite different. They have completely different faces and even different eye colors in regards to Wedge, Jessie, Biggs, and the Train Guard for some reason. In the first Mako reactor, after setting the bomb, Biggs is absent, and you run into him near the walk mesh and you have to save him just like you do in the final game when Jessie gets her leg stuck. The soundtrack used in the prototype is also an early version. For example, the iconic prelude is only present in the demo as a remix, and it's a pretty good remix as well. So this is really interesting, but unfortunately there's not a lot of information on it. So this is very short, but I want to talk about it because I wish there was more information about this prototype. Here's what we do know. This is from a CD that was released exclusively in Japan that contains some FF7 stuff like early artwork, guides on items, and footage of an alpha build of FF7. This build contains 3D rendered backgrounds, icons for the characters during battle, and instead of the portraits of the characters on the menu that we got in the final game, we have pixelated 2D full body sprites instead. Red 13 also looks more detailed and honestly really cool. I honestly would love to play this, and it sucks that it's not playable. So now we have the prototype of the classic original Crash Bandicoot game. This one's very intriguing. For example, the menu for the prototype is very different. It shows Cortex and Embryo about to experiment on Tawna. And it's kinda creepy because there's literally no music, just silence. The silence part also kinda applies to the prototype itself. While most of the sound effects are there are ones that are noticeably missing, and this whole prototype just has no music whatsoever, which again just feels off. Obviously it's just because the music most likely wasn't finished yet, but the game just feels so different without the music, you know? Also, the checkpoint sound is different, and honestly cooler sounding than the one we got in the final game. I believe it's also a sound effect they reused for Cortex Strikes Back during the hologram scenes. Now time for the most interesting of the differences, unused levels. This prototype has a few unused levels that can be accessed. Let's start off with the most known one, Stormy Ascent, the infamous level that was cut from the original, that was also remade for the Insane Trilogy's DLC, is actually playable in this prototype, and is pretty much complete, which makes sense because Stormy Ascent was cut pretty much right before the game's release. Naughty Dog had decided to cut the level due to it being too difficult for children, which honestly, Crash Bandicoot 1 is pretty difficult even without Stormy Ascent. I've literally rage quit this game so many times over levels like Road to Nowhere. But anyways, the level looks pretty cool and is complete with enemies and objects, so it's a shame that it didn't make the cut. Next we have Acid Rain. This level is very cool looking. I'm a sucker for crystal themed levels, to be honest. But when it's being played, it's full of glitches. Crash is just able to walk on the acid completely unfazed, and will also just die from touching random places. There's also absolutely no sound in this level, like no sound effects or anything, which at this point isn't out of the ordinary for this prototype, so I should just stop mentioning it. Last of the unused levels, we have Flowing Water, which is a waterfall-based level. There are plenty of missing textures in this level, but it's more developed than Acid Rain was. The map is a bit bigger, there's a ton of falling platforms and slippery platforms to climb on. There's even some skunk and turtle enemies. Next up, Astound the Skunk. This is a cliff-themed level, and is very buggy. Crash can just walk on the air. The enemies in this level also move very weirdly. They just constantly spin around, except for the hyena enemies, which just sit there frozen and do nothing. Well, there we go. That was PS1 video game prototypes that I found really interesting. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if there's any prototypes or anything really video game related, animation related, whatever you would like me to talk about in the future, don't hesitate to comment below. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope this enlightens you a little bit on the world of PS1 game prototypes. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!